The Tascam DR-70D is a 4-channel audio recorder purpose-built for DSLR use and video production. It's well-built, highly versatile, and is relatively affordable. Audio recorders might seem pretty simple, but there's a lot more here than what meets the eye. So let's take a closer look. So to get everyone on the same page with what an external audio recorder is, we'll just go over the definition so we all know what we're talking about. So when audio is recorded, it has to be processed separately from video. And if you record video on your cell phone or maybe on a camera like a DSLR, you'll notice that if you're not using a microphone, it's not particularly high quality, and that's because it's hard to devote a lot of energy and resources and money to microphones, high quality microphones and audio processors in an all-in-one device like a cell phone or a DSLR. The gear that I used for a while was just this camera that I'm using now with a shotgun mic, with this shotgun mic sitting on top of my camera. I did videos like that for a long time and it worked pretty well. If you dig back in my channel, you might be able to find them. The audio sounds okay, but it's not great, and I wanted to make an upgrade. Granted, this can be expensive, especially if you're not doing this professionally. The only reason that I really made my upgrade to professional level film equipment, is because I was working in freelance video for a long time, about a year. It's not a long time, it's a year, but anyways, I had to upgrade my gear so that I would have professional sounding audio, and I needed to have reliable audio for my clients. And so that's where this comes in. And so the 70D is an external audio recorder, which means that it has its own hardware and technology dedicated to receiving sound and processing it, encoding it, and putting it on storage so that I can use it later on. So now that we have that definition set, let's move on to actually talking about the 70D. In addition to having a separate processor just for audio, an audio recorder can make you more mobile. Instead of having your microphone attached directly to your camera like I did, you can move around with your recorder. I record my videos with this lavalier mic pack. Have to be a little careful because I'm recording obviously right now. Here it is, and the microphone's on my hoodie. You can get versions of these wireless packs that will work with a DSLR, they're mounted on top of it, but these aren't professional grade and they don't have a lot of the features that professional audio equipment does, so use at your own risk. A lot of professional audio equipment connects via XLR, which means if you want to use devices like this, you'll need a compatible recording device. So now that you've thought a little bit about whether or not you actually need an audio recorder, let's take a look at what the DR-70D can actually do. The first thing that you'll notice about the camera is these two orange brackets right on the front. These are used to secure the device into an audio bag or for attaching a shoulder strap directly to them. I use this bag, the Orca OR28, to hold my audio gear, and I talk about it in the video tagged up here. You'll also immediately notice the LCD screen. It displays menus, levels, and information while you're recording. This does have a backlit mode that turns bright orange and makes it much easier to read. I recommend setting this to always be on because I find the screen really hard to read, especially if you're not in a very well-lit environment. We will go over the menus and settings, all the settings you can change a bit later in the video, so don't worry about that for now. The large knob labeled Data is for menu navigation and selection, and the menu button above it also helps you navigate the menus. The 4 knobs that you see to the right are for adjusting levels for each channel on the fly. I usually leave them alone, but if you're recording on set, these can be very helpful if you have a dynamic audio source. Small gray buttons are for playback on your files and also some navigational controls. The record button is pretty much self-explanatory, and there's a Slate button, which I'll explain. Since you can have up to 4 tracks recording on the device at once, you'll probably want to be able to sync them at some point. What the Slate button does is generates a tone at a constant level that will allow you to align and mix tracks based on that benchmark. I haven't used this feature very frequently since I'm not usually using that many tracks, but it is a nice option to have and a good failsafe to have if you're ever using all your tracks. The right side of the device has 3 XLR inputs, which have options for 1/4-inch TRS inputs as well, and there's a power switch on the left side. The left side of the device has 1 XLR input also with a 1/4-inch TRS jack, and there's a USB power input, an external input for an 1/8-inch plug, And the camera in port allows audio from the camera you're recording on to go into the DR-70D for monitoring and recording. Camera out is just the opposite. It allows audio from the DR-70D to be recorded to the camera's video file directly. The remote jack is for connecting a sold separately remote that Tascam makes that allows operation of the DR-70D from a distance. Finally, there is a headphone jack with a volume adjustment wheel. On the back of the device are the two built-in microphones I mentioned earlier and a removable panel. Behind that panel is a slot for an SD card and the battery compartment. I use the rechargeable Eneloops by Panasonic, although I'm considering upgrading to the Eneloop Pros, which can supply more voltage at once, and I'm hoping they will work a little bit more consistently than these ones. I've mentioned these batteries in a video before, actually that same camera bag video, but check out the links in the description if you're interested in learning more. You've probably noticed the top of the device, which has a 1/4-inch screw mounted to it. The screw is captive, which means that it won't fall out, which is a nice feature. And this panel can actually be removed to reveal a cold shoe mount for mounting a shotgun microphone like the one I showed earlier. You can slap this bad boy on top. The 1/4-inch screw is really useful for mounting a DSLR because you can mount the rig directly to your 70D. You can then even mount your recorder to a tripod with the 1/4-inch screw you see on the bottom here. So you can just stack everything on your tripod to be able to see both your audio and video recordings at the same time. Pretty cool. The device's I/O is pretty simple. There isn't much to explain. Things get a little bit more complex when we start to dig into the quality and recording settings. So let's walk through the menus. To start, press the menu button to access the menu. The first option, Basic, allows you to activate each of the 4 channels. You can scroll through to access each channel sequentially. Each channel can be turned on or off, and you can adjust the pan, which is where the audio will be recorded to. If you set it to left, it'll record in the left ear, right will be the right ear, center is center. If you're recording on all 4 tracks, you'll need to move the tracks to different sides of the audio track in order to preserve them individually. With 2 tracks, if you're recording 2 tracks at the same time, you can separate one track to the left, the other to the right. You can duplicate them, isolate the 2 channels, and then mix them separately. The device can only record 1 file in stereo, so you're limited to recording 4 tracks at the same time, with 2 tracks combined on each side of the stereo track. Next, you can set the gain, and then finally, you set the input. The XLR TRS option is using one of the 4 inputs we talked about earlier. And for channels 1 and 2, you can set them to be the 1/8-inch jack on the left side of the device using external stereo. If the device needs power, you use that same jack, but use the external power option instead. So one thing I didn't mention earlier was how to turn on the built-in internal mics. These ones. There's not a lot of great documentation about how to do it online, but I did some research and found out exactly how to do that. So you navigate to the Basic tab like we've been in, and you'll have your different channels here. And so if I go back, you'll notice that the channels are off, so not receiving any input as I tap on the device. So go to our Basic tab. You can scroll through all your channels here, and for inputs 3 and 4, you can set them to be at mic. You can't do that for 1 and 2, as you can see, but for channels 3 and 4, you can set them to be either the XLR input or the mic input. And so if you set them to be on when the input is set to mic, you can see that when I go back, I've set the gain a little higher than I normally do for the XLR settings. I found that it works a little better that way. So now if I go back, you can see that we're receiving input for both channels. I'll do a quick test. So now I'm just sitting a few feet away from the microphone. I'll give you an idea of what it sounds like. So these are facing away with the gain set to mid. If I turn it around, maybe the sound will get a bit better. So let's see, just talking normally like I was before, except with the mics facing me now. And turn it back the other way. And if I adjust the knobs here, we should be getting more sound out of, that's the 4th channel there. This is the 3rd channel, so If I set this all the way to be maxed out, if I turn them all the way up, we're probably hearing some noise now. Turn it around to face me. See what it sounds like now. This is the Tascam audio. I'll be putting the Tascam audio all the way through this so you get an idea of what it sounds like. So that does it for the basic tab. Use the menu button to back out, and then we can take a look at the monitor tab. This allows us to control what we hear in our headphones while listening to what we're recording. The monitor's select option lets us choose between mix, which is what our inputs are hearing, and cam, which is what the input we receive from the camera import we touched on earlier. It's a little confusing, but you get it. Output level will allow for adjustment of either raising or lowering the headphone output by default increments. You can still make smaller adjustments with the headphone slider we mentioned earlier. The output gain option will change depending on what device you want to monitor. Line means that your device needs no power, so a device like headphones or a powered amplifier. The cam option means that you're sending the signal to a camera, which adjusts the gain accordingly. And so that's the monitor tab covered. Get ready, because the input tab is the most complex of all the ones we'll cover. It allows you to change a lot of settings for each individual input. Input gain should be adjusted to closest match the kind of equipment you're using. Mic is the default setting and should be used when connecting any kind of microphone to an input. Line is for connecting any kind of analog sound output like 3.5mm or 1/4" TRS. Mic plus phantom is an option for using the DR-70D to supply power to a microphone plugged into one of the 4 XLR jacks. Some microphones require power to operate, and the 70D supports power delivery over XLR. You can change the power delivered to 24 or 48 volts in the mic setting menu. We'll touch on that later. The limiter option uses the device's gain to keep a constant level and adjusts for loud noises to avoid distortion in the track. Having this off is the default, but setting it to mono will turn it on for the selected channel. When it's set to link, it will adjust both the current and linked channels. A low-cut filter can reduce noise from wind or electronic hums happening in the room. There are several intervals available, so see which one works best for your ambient noise. I will warn you that this will be baked into the audio file that you record, and there are ways to achieve this same effect in post with some pretty minor tweaks. I would recommend doing this in your editing software if it has to be done at all. I think you'll have much more control that way, and you won't have to depend on your ears on set while doing it. The delay section allows you to offset the audio recording by up to 150 milliseconds. This is really only helpful if you're recording directly into the camera and are far away from your subject, like if you're recording a sports interview way down the field or something. Otherwise, the audio and video tracks can be lined up in post, so it shouldn't be a big problem. I'm not super familiar with the phase option. I can't really find a good definition of it, and I've never had to use it. Based on what I could find, I think it's for recording two microphones that are in slightly different positions. I feel like you should be able to just line them up. Maybe, I'm not a musician guy, so let me know in the comments if you know what that's for. But you can adjust the settings for it here if you like. There was lots of stuff to look at in the input menu, and there's even more to look at in record. But don't worry, the others are not so options heavy. The file type selection will allow you to record in mono, which is only one track of recording, stereo, which is 2 tracks of recording, and then mixed, which is both an analog and digital signal. Format will allow you to change the file type that's being recorded, and as well as the bit rates. BWF stands for Broadcast Wave Format, which is exactly the same as WAV, the standard option, but it includes more metadata about the file, like what device it was recorded on and the timestamp and things like that. The audio of the 2 files is exactly the same, so unless you work in broadcast or have direction to do otherwise, using WAV is probably fine. That's what I use most of the time, actually all of the time. I choose the higher bitrate recording option, which is 24-bit. This means that it just includes a little more data in the recording process. For sample rate, I stick with 48K. The other options are 44.1K and 96K, both of which 44.1 is probably fine, but 96 is overkill. I do like the idea that I can capture a little bit more data in my recordings, but I'm probably compressing it so much that it doesn't really matter. But I like overkill, so I'm sticking with it. Slate options are quick. The auto tone allows you to create a tone at the beginning and end of recordings You can choose whether you want it at the beginning or both the beginning and the end. And then you can also set your tone volume. On the mic setting page, you can enable mid-side decoding. From my understanding, mid-side is just using microphones in positions facing each other, but rotated 90 degrees, I think. This is probably mainly used, I could only find it used in recording instruments. So the device can be set to decode the modes in certain pairs. Here is also where you can change the voltage of the phantom power supplied to the microphone. I mentioned that earlier. Now we're on to the easy stuff. Browse is where you can view the files that you've already recorded on your SD card. And there are other options like miscellaneous items for battery type, file name, and system settings. You can tweak those to your liking. That's actually where you find the backlight option that I mentioned earlier. So now that we're done talking about menus, I'd like to touch on my impressions of the 70D. It's not super flashy, no audio recorder is. And before I used this, I mentioned I was using a small zoom recorder with only 2 XLR inputs. With the 70D, I have a lot more recording options, but mainly my upgrade checklist was more inputs as well as on-the-fly level adjustment. The construction of the device is pretty solid, although the thing is almost entirely plastic, it feels like. You can hear. The device has a decent weight to it. It's thick and solid plastic. Especially once the batteries are added, it's not going anywhere. The brackets on the front are the only thing I can feel are metal, and I trust them to hold their weight. I do really like that the XLR ports have metal tabs. It keeps the connection secure, they hold them in place. I do have some connections that get stuck on the tabs, but it doesn't happen frequently enough to warrant concern. I will say that the battery flap is, see if I can do this without ruining everything, is pretty rugged. I normally keep it in an audio bag, and it's a bit of a pain to get to, so I kind of rough that thing up a good bit, so kudos to that for staying on. I'll now do a couple test recordings so that you can hear the noise floor of my devices and get a feel for the sound in general coming off this thing. So now I'm going to just sit here talking so you can listen to me talking for a test take for test purposes. This is normal volume. I would record like this. I'm going to turn up my channel until it starts peaking. Testing, 1, 2, testing, testing, 1, 2, testing. So this is with the knob all the way turned up on my channel 1 knob here. So I'll let you take in the difference if there is one. I'm turning it down now, turning it down, all the way down, halfway, 3/4 down. Turn it back up until I can see the bar. I still can't see, there it is, there's the bar back. Now I'll sit in silence for like 5 seconds. Now I'm going to turn the microphone off so you can hear what the device sounds like by itself. I considered some devices that were much more expensive than this, like the sound devices Misc 3. I used that in college and it was pretty similar to this, maybe a little smaller, but that machine is more than 3 times as expensive as this one, and that puts it way out of my budget. It also didn't offer much more functionality, at least not enough to justify the price in my mind. A budget alternative, if you're looking for something similar, would be the Tascam 60D Mark II. It's about $100 cheaper than the 70D, which I think is actually a steal. It has the same amount of inputs and many of the additional features like monitoring and multi-track recordings. The main reason I chose the 70D is actually this shape. I wanted to mount my recorder to my tripod, and I didn't want a boxier model like the 60D. It's probably about that much thicker than the 70D. It's hard to justify the extra $100 unless you really want a narrower model like I did. If you're gonna get a recorder like this, I really recommend getting an audio bag like the Orca one that I have. I can't recommend this brand enough. This is a super sick bag and it was very cheap. This gives you a good way to carry it around and allows you to keep your whole audio kit together safe in one place. I'll be doing another video on the lavalier set that I use to record, since it's got its own little nuances by itself, but that really completes my whole audio kit. Overall, I'm really happy with the way that the device has worked so far. Haven't had any problems with it, which is basically my only criteria for a device like this. Once it works and gets out of the way, that's good enough for me. The one qualm I would have is the battery department. I get why it's in the back of the device, probably just for room. It is a real pain to reach when it's sitting in the bottom of an audio bag. So it'll normally sit like this, which means I have to reach under. Granted, there's a door on the bottom, but it's hard to get the batteries out when it's sitting like that. This thing is also quite a battery hog. I do use reusable batteries and I recharge them after every shoot because they've gotten low. I don't trust them to work for multiple shoots, but this thing works when I need it to. That's kind of the bottom line. I'm happy with the way it's gone so far. Thanks so much for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you found the content helpful. If you did enjoy the content, please hit the thumbs up button below and also leave a comment if you feel like it. If you'd like to see more videos like this, you can subscribe and hit the bell so that more of these videos show up in your feed. If you're interested in picking up any of the products I mentioned in this video, you can use the links below. I get a small commission when you do that. Even when you just click the links and buy another product that unrelated to this video, I'll get a small commission, which doesn't cost you anything additional and helps support content like this. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.